Before you dive into this story, remember this. Sometimes the greatest battles aren't fought in boardrooms or on the streets. They're fought across courtroom tables, with truth as your only weapon. This is the story of Marina Cole, a successful Black entrepreneur who believed love could coexist with trust. But when her husband's charm turned into calculation, she discovered that protecting herself wasn't selfish, it was survival. Through betrayal, legal warfare, and poetic justice, she learned that boundaries don't kill love, they define it. If you believe women should protect what they build, share the story. If you've ever been underestimated or taken advantage of, keep reading, because Marina's victory is a reminder that no contract can outlast courage. Stay until the end and see how power returns to the woman who refuses to be played. I'm collecting half of everything, including your Grey Tant's estate, Dorian Pike announced, flashing a grin so slick it bounced off the wood-paneled walls of Essex County Family Court in Newark. The puffed-up certainty in his voice knotted my stomach, but I kept still at the respondent's table, palms flat, breathing even. My name is Marina Cole. I'm 43, and I never pictured myself here, trading vows for filings and a future for affidavits. 6 years of marriage, and the man beside his lawyer was trying to reroute the work of my entire adult life. Dorian, a Black man with a barbershop fresh fade and a suit I'd once surprised him with for his birthday, lounged like he'd already won. I used to love that posture. How relaxed he seemed. Now it read like entitlement. He whispered to Clinton Reeves, his attorney, while I sat beside Selah Drumright, mine, a woman whose calm could quiet a fire. Your Honor, Reeves began, smoothing a stack of papers. My client is entitled to an equal share of all marital property, including the substantial inheritance Miss Cole received during the marriage. Behind us, a few reporters hovered, drawn by the rumor of a high-dollar divorce involving a well-known Newark consultant. Spectators leaned in, as if the math of my life were a ballgame score. On the bench, Judge Leona Jarrett, a Black woman in her late 60s with silver braids swept into a low bun, studied the initial filings with a gaze that gave nothing away. 2 decades on this bench, I'd heard. She'd seen the whole parade. Tears, theatrics, and threats. I doubted she'd seen what I was about to place in her hands. Dorian angled his chair and sent me a gleaming, triumphant smile. The audacity made my jaw tighten. This was the same man who used to bring me ginger tea when deadlines ran long, the same man who swore he loved my mind, not my bank account. Looking at him now, I could finally see the shape of the story he'd been writing. The courtroom carried that museum hush, old wood, older rules. Far beyond the windows, Newark moved like usual. Buses sighing at the curb, vendors calling out, the city alive. Inside, my life was being totaled like a receipt. I pressed my fingers against my purse, feeling the edge of a thick, sealed envelope. My anchor. Miss Cole, Judge Jarrett said, voice even. Do you wish to respond to counsel's claims? I rose. My heartbeat thumped hard enough to measure time, but my resolve was heavier than my fear. Yes, Your Honor. There's something the court should see. If I'm honest, the signs were there long before we filed. Dorian entered my life during a season when the quiet in my apartment felt too wide. I had just turned 41. I was steering Northbridge Metrics, my data operations firm, and romance lived in the margins between client calls and red-eye flights. We met at a business summit in Detroit. He laughed easily, listened well, and asked detailed questions about predictive models like he'd been waiting his whole life to talk about pivot tables. You make numbers sing, he told me once, watching me turn a messy ledger into a picture anyone could read. I thought it was admiration. Now I know it was calculation. Our courtship arrived like a sponsored ad. Perfectly targeted. Rooftop dinners. Last-minute weekend getaways. Dorian worked in medical device sales back then, but the budget he kept for surprises ran larger than his base salary. I invest in the people I love, he'd say when I raised an eyebrow. It sounded noble. It was strategy. He proposed after 9 months, on a private terrace above the river, a small band playing 90s R&B, as if it were a blessing. The ring glittered like new ice. My attorney, Selah, had urged me to protect what I'd built. It's not about romance. It's about clarity. I felt awkward bringing it up, knowing how it might bruise the air between us. Dorian just laughed, a throw-it-over-the-shoulder sound. Whatever helps you sleep, Ma. I'm here for you, not your accounts. He signed the marital contract, a comprehensive agreement and accompanying trust structure Selah designed, without hiring his own counsel, waving off every caution like a fly. We're black, we're grown, we're in love, he said, scrawling his signature. We don't need paperwork to tell us that. He called it a relationship ritual. I exhaled, relieved and grateful, and filed the originals where they'd be safe. 22 months into our marriage, my great-aunt Ruthie passed and left me everything she had protected and grown. Her brownstone, a portfolio of municipal bonds, a first-edition collection she'd built over decades, and $3.4 million in carefully managed funds. I hadn't expected the scale. Overnight, my stability became something else entirely. Dorian's eyes flashed when I told him. 3.4, he breathed. Marina, we made it. That we should have stopped me. It didn't. He changed lanes fast after that. Within 7 months, he quit his job to explore ventures that match our lifestyle. He bought a German coupe for meetings, invested $42,000 in a friend's lounge that folded in under a year, and talked his way into a private golf club because deals happen on fairways. Every time I raised a question, he wrapped me in language. Partnership, trust, legacy. The mask cracked half a year ago. I learned he'd been telling people at the club that the estate was family money, introducing himself as an investor while neglecting to mention his seed capital came from a black woman who loved him and from the discipline of my great-aunt's lifetime. When I confronted him, he went from defensive to cruel in 4 sentences. You were a machine before me, he snapped. I taught you how to enjoy life. The sting wasn't in the insult. It was in the precision. He'd studied me like a market and placed his bet. Then I found the emails. Dorian and Clinton mapping out divorce strategy, studying New Jersey cases, gaming out how to argue that emotional support and marital lifestyle elevation entitled him to a payout. That night I called Selah. I would not let him set the scene or choose the act breaks. Now, in this courtroom, I reached into my purse and pulled out the sealed envelope. The room tuned itself to the sound of paper. Your Honor, I said, voice steady. Before any discussion of division, the court should review this. Judge Jarrett extended a hand. What is it, Miss Cole? A marital contract and protected trust documentation, I replied. Executed 7 weeks before the wedding. Signed by both parties. Notarized. With full financial disclosures and a clause addressing inheritances received during the marriage. Across the aisle, Clinton Reeves shot up as if he'd sat on a pin. Your Honor, we were not informed. Mr. Reeves, Judge Jarrett said, slicing the air with a look. I'll review it. I returned to my seat. Dorian's face shifted, swagger to confusion to fear. In under a minute. He leaned hard into his lawyer's shoulder. I could read the shape of the whisper on his lips. She never told how. Selah rested a hand on the table and breathed like a metronome. Watch, she murmured. We prepared for this. Judge Jarrett read. Page after page. The gallery held its breath. When she finally looked up, her expression had cooled from neutral to edged. This appears to be a properly executed agreement with a companion trust, she said. Executed 7 weeks before the ceremony, notarized, with both signatures. The disclosures are extensive. Behind me, pens began to scratch again. In front of me, Dorian's knuckles whitened around the edge of his table. Proceed, Judge Jarrett said. We'll take this into account. Clinton adjusted his tie, like it might change the law. Your Honor, my client had no notice of any ancillary instruments, he said carefully. We request time to review. Judge Jarrett tapped the cover sheet with one manicured finger. Counsel, discovery is not a buffet. You don't plate the entrees you prefer and ignore what might upset your stomach. She opened the packet, reading in a silence that thinned the air. Section 3. All property owned before marriage remains the separate property of its owner. Section 4, subsection C. Any inheritance or gift received by either party during the marriage remains separate property if held in a non-commingled account or protected trust. Attachments include certified banking statements, asset ledgers, and a copy of the Ruth A. Dawson Trust. She lifted her eyes. Mr. Reeves, did you or your client conduct even basic due diligence? Clinton's pause answered for him. Across the aisle, Dorian lurched halfway to his feet. Your Honor, I never. She said it was symbolic, like a keepsake. Mr. Pike, Judge Jarrett warned, sit. Your attorney will speak for you. He sat, but the panic didn't. It lived in the way his shoulders rose, in the pulse ticking at his temple. The gallery leaned forward, phones pocketed but attention lit. Selah slid a slim folder closer to me. Breathe, she whispered. Truth does the heavy lifting. Judge Jarrett turned another page. I see independent counsel advisories. She looked at Clinton. Did your client waive counsel at the time of signing? Clinton flipped, hunting for a life raft. There is a signed waiver. And notarization with identification scanned and archived, the judge added. Photos attached. Mr. Pike holding a pen and smiling like this is a cookout guest book. A ripple of laughter fluttered, then died at her glance. We'll recess 10 minutes, so you can read what you should have requested months ago. The gavel clicked, and the room exhaled. Reporters traded looks. A bailiff checked the clock. Dorian and Clinton huddled by the window where winter light fell in pale squares across the floor. Dorian spoke with his hands, chopping the air, then gripping his own neck like he needed to hold his head on. Selah used the pause to rearrange our exhibits with the serenity of someone lining up dominoes she already knows will fall. She touched the tab marked non-commingling. Bankers' boxes of statements mean nothing if you can't narrate them, she said low. You've been narrating your life the whole time. Today we just put captions under the frames. When court reconvened, Clinton stepped forward wearing the tight smile of a man arguing against gravity. Your Honor, my client maintains that he was misled as to the nature of this document. He believed it ceremonial, a marriage pledge, not a comprehensive asset agreement and trust instrument. The judge stared at him like he'd offered her a riddle without an answer. Are you asserting fraud? We assert that the execution lacked informed consent. Because Mr. Pike did not read what he signed, she asked. Clinton tried again. Because he trusted his wife. I pressed my tongue to my molars to keep from laughing. Dorian had always bragged about his business instincts, the way he could smell a bad deal. Now, apparently, his nose had a cold. Judge Jarrett turned her gaze to Dorian. Mr. Pike, were you forced to sign these documents? No, ma'am, he said, jaw sliding. Threatened? No. Under the influence of any substance? No. Then tell the court. Did you read them? The room went quiet enough to hear the air unit hum. Dorian's eyes moved like he could find a lifeline in the molding. I skimmed. She said it was for tradition. So, you signed a legal instrument you did not fully read and waived your right to independent counsel, the judge summarized. And now you'd like this court to pretend none of that occurred because you regret it. A murmur rustled behind us. Clinton cleared his throat. In the alternative, Your Honor, we argue unconscionability, given the disparity in resources and the length of the marriage. Then let's test fairness, the judge replied, returning to the packet. The disclosures include Ms. Cole's premarital assets and anticipated inheritance. The agreement waives spousal support for both parties. Debts remain separate. Appreciation of separate assets remains separate absent commingling. I also see that Ms. Cole opened distinct accounts at Gateway Federal and titled the inheritance into the Ruth A. Dawson Trust within 30 days of receipt. She slid the page aside. Ms. Cole, please approach. I stood. My legs felt steady now. You maintained those funds apart from any shared checking, yes? Yes, Your Honor. Household expenses were covered from my salary and the business's duly reported distributions. The trust assets remained cordoned off. Any vacations, vehicles, or club dues paid from those trust accounts? No, ma'am. I glanced at Selah. She gave a tiny nod. Those came from operating income. I have ledgers. Dorian bolted upright. That's not true. She. Mr. Pike, the judge snapped. Outbursts will earn you a seat in lockup. He sank down, rage wearing him like a badly tailored jacket. Selah rose with our binder. With the court's permission, we can mark exhibits A through F, bank statements, payroll records, and vendor invoices, showing clean separation between personal earnings and the trust corpus. Admitted, the judge said. She skimmed the tabs, approving. Counsel, anything further? Clinton tried to conjure a loophole, but the pages on the bench answered faster than he could. He settled for a sigh. We'd ask the court to consider equitable adjustments. Judge Jarrett folded her hands. Equity is not a wand. It's a scale. Today, the scale is very clearly marked. She turned back to me. Ms. Cole, in your own words, why did you create the trust and this agreement? I didn't bother with the legalese. Because a black woman in business learns early that love and money need different locks. My great-aunt taught me to guard what elders built, so it keeps working after we're gone. I wanted a marriage, not a merger. Something eased at the corners of the judge's mouth. Noted. Clinton made one last attempt. Your Honor, at minimum, we request time to depose the notary and examine the circumstances. You may file motions, she said, but I will not ignore what's already in front of me. She lifted the packet once more, her voice carrying to the back row. Section 7. Each party waives the right to alimony or spousal maintenance from the other regardless of marital length or income disparity. Initialed by both. Witnessed. Dated. Dorian's shoulders slumped like the sentence had weight. Maybe for the first time, the math was doing him instead of the other way around. Very well, Judge Jarrett concluded. We'll proceed to findings on validity, and then to the limited question of any jointly acquired property, if any exists. Selah tapped my elbow, the signal we'd planned. Ready, she whispered. Ready, I said, and meant it. The next 30 minutes played out like a slow dismantling of a lie. Judge Jarrett read every line of the contract aloud. Each section landed like a hammer against the marble floor. Section 9, Liabilities. Debts incurred by either party shall remain the sole responsibility of that party. Section 10, Waiver. Neither party may claim alimony, maintenance, or restitution for lifestyle change, regardless of marital duration. When she finally looked up, her eyes cut through Dorian like glass. Mr. Pike, this agreement was executed properly, with full disclosures. The court sees no evidence of coercion or fraud. Dorian's face darkened. His composure broke like a cheap veneer. This can't be real, he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. I've been her husband for 6 years. That should count for something. Selah stood smoothly. Your Honor, if I may clarify for the record, Mr. Pike's length of marriage does not override written contractual protections, nor does emotional support qualify as financial contribution under this agreement. Judge Jarrett nodded. Correct. The document is explicit. Ms. Cole's pre-existing and inherited assets remain her sole property. Clinton attempted one last defense. Your Honor, perhaps the court could weigh equitable distribution. My client made sacrifices. He left his employment to maintain the household. Judge Jarrett's tone cooled. Sacrifices made voluntarily are not entitlements. If your client elected leisure over labor, that is not compensable under the law. A suppressed chuckle rippled from the back row. Dorian spun in his chair, glaring at the gallery. The same charm that once filled rooms now looked desperate and hollow. The judge continued, Do we have documentation of debts incurred solely by Mr. Pike? Selah passed a labeled folder to the bailiff. Yes, Your Honor. Exhibit G through L, personal loans, vehicle financing, luxury club fees, and an unrecouped investment totaling approximately $92,400. Dorian's mouth fell open. Those were joint experiences. Selah tilted her head. Joint experiences, singular receipts, Your Honor. The courtroom laughed quietly until the judge's gavel restored order. Mr. Pike, Judge Jarrett said, It appears your financial pattern during this marriage was one of consistent withdrawal from accounts held solely in your name or in shared accounts funded by Ms. Cole's income. The evidence suggests misrepresentation of marital partnership. Dorian's breathing turned shallow. So, what? You're just gonna strip me of everything? No, the judge said evenly. You stripped yourself. I'm simply certifying the outcome. For a long moment, no one spoke. The weight of consequence filled the space between us, heavy as stone. Finally, Judge Jarrett lifted the signed agreement again. Based on these documents and the supporting evidence, the court finds this contract valid, binding, and fully enforceable. No portion of Ms. Cole's trust, inheritance, or premarital business assets shall be considered marital property. She turned a page. Furthermore, Mr. Pike's personal debts, documented here, shall remain his responsibility. The blow landed with visible force. Dorian slumped, the fight bleeding out of him. Clinton rubbed a hand over his face, avoiding his client's stare. Selah closed our binder softly, whispering, "That's the wall coming down." But the judge wasn't done. "Mr. Pike," she said, "before I finalize, is there anything you wish to state on record?" He rose shakily, hands trembling. "Yeah," he said hoarsely. "I just want it known that she used me. She made me think I was part of her world, part of her success, and now she's acting like I was a stranger in her house." Judge Jarrett's voice turned to steel. "Mr. Pike, your wife built her house before you walked through its door. That's not exclusion. That's preparation." The room fell still again. I looked at Dorian, then really looked. The man who once seemed so magnetic now looked small, drowned in a suit that didn't fit, grasping for a story that had already ended. Judge Jarrett stacked her papers neatly. "I will issue my ruling in full shortly. We'll take a 15-minute recess before final orders." As the bailiff called for recess, Dorian stumbled toward me, anger twisting his mouth. "You think this makes you some kind of hero? You humiliated me." I met his eyes and said quietly, "No. You humiliated yourself the day you tried to turn love into an investment plan." Selah stepped between us, calm but unmovable. "Walk away, Mr. Pike. You've lost enough for one afternoon." He hesitated, then turned and left the courtroom, his footsteps echoing against the marble floor until they vanished behind the heavy doors. I exhaled, slow, deliberate, like releasing years of held breath. The weight that had been pressing on my chest since the first hearing began to lift. Selah looked over, half smiling. "You ready for the last chapter?" "More than ready," I said. When the court reconvened, the energy had changed. Gone was the smug confidence that had filled the room earlier. Reporters leaned forward, pens ready. Even the clerk seemed more alert, sensing the close of a long battle. Judge Jarrett returned to the bench, her robe flowing behind her like a dark tide. "This court is now back in session," she said, settling into her seat. "We'll proceed with the ruling in Cole versus Pike." Every sound faded. The air conditioning hum, the distant chatter outside, even the creak of seats, as her voice filled the silence. Having reviewed the evidence and the executed agreement, she began, "The court finds that the document presented by Ms. Cole, dated July 8, 2019, is valid, comprehensive, and legally binding under the statutes of this jurisdiction. Mr. Pike's claims of deception and ignorance are unsupported by any credible evidence." She turned toward Dorian. "You signed this contract of your own free will, waived independent counsel, and verified its authenticity before a notary. The law does not rescue individuals from their own carelessness." The words struck like verdict stones. Judge Jarrett continued, her tone steady but sharp. "Accordingly, this court awards no division of Ms. Cole's premarital assets, her business holdings, or her inherited trust funds. Additionally, per Section 9 of the agreement, all debts accrued individually during the marriage remain the responsibility of the party who incurred them." She flipped to the last page of her notes. "Records show that Mr. Pike holds personal liabilities totaling $92,400, including vehicle financing, personal loans, and club fees. Those debts shall remain his responsibility. This divorce is finalized effective today. Neither party owes alimony or support to the other." A single gavel strike echoed through the chamber like thunder. "This court is adjourned." For a long moment no one moved. The gravity of the decision hung heavy in the air, broken only by the sound of reporters scribbling and one man muttering a low, "Wow," under his breath. Dorian sat frozen. The reality was still sinking in, the reversal of fortune, the sudden vacuum where his imagined wealth had been. His skin looked gray under the courtroom lights. Then he muttered, "You can't do this. I gave her 6 years of my life." Judge Jarrett, already halfway to her chambers, didn't even turn. "You'll find, Mr. Pike, that time given for profit is not love, it's labor. And unpaid labor earns no dividend here." The courtroom broke into murmurs. I stood, my knees steady this time. Selah gathered our papers neatly, her expression soft but proud. "That," she whispered, "is what accountability sounds like." As we stepped into the hallway, Dorian called after me, his voice cracking. "Marina, wait. We can talk this through. You don't want it to end like this." I turned back slowly, taking in the man who had once promised me forever, but only meant until it paid off. "It ended," I said quietly, "the moment you treated love like leverage." He flinched as though I'd struck him. Clinton touched his shoulder, murmured something, and guided him away toward the exit. Outside the courtroom, the winter light hit hard through the tall glass windows. The city pulsed beyond the courthouse steps, taxis, vendors, the normal rhythm of life resuming. Selah handed me the certified decree. "Congratulations," she said. "You're free legally and financially." I looked down at the embossed seal, the document that ended a 6-year illusion. "Free," I repeated. The word didn't feel bitter. It felt earned. Reporters waited near the entrance, calling my name, asking for a statement. Selah stepped forward, intercepting them with professional calm. "Miss Cole has no comment at this time," she said, her voice like a closing door. When we finally reached the courthouse steps, I stopped. The cold wind tugged at my coat, but I didn't mind. I had been through worse storms. For the first time in years, I felt completely steady. Behind us, the courthouse doors opened, and Dorian emerged, alone, shoulders bowed, phone in hand but no one answering on the other end. He looked small against the wide sky. I didn't turn back again. Some chapters deserve to close without ceremony. Selah's phone buzzed. "Press already posting headlines," she said. "Entrepreneur outsmarts gold-digging spouse in 6-year marriage scandal." I smiled faintly. "Let them talk. The truth doesn't need my voice." She nodded. "You sure you don't want to go celebrate?" "Not yet," I said. "Let's finish what we started first." 6 months later, spring swept across Newark, and with it came the quiet hum of renewal. The scandal had long burned through the city's gossip cycle, but its ash still lingered in the corners of Dorian Pike's life. He'd lost nearly everything, the $92,000 plus in debt that became $103,000 with interest, the sports coupe that was repossessed 2 weeks after the ruling, the golf club membership revoked for non-payment, and the self-image that had once carried him through every room. Word spread fast, among colleagues, among old friends, among women who'd once smiled at his charm but now crossed the street when they saw him coming. He moved back in with his aging parents in Camden, sleeping in the same room where teenage posters still clung to the walls. The once golden man with the custom suits now sold auto parts for commission. No cameras followed him there. No one cared to record how fast ambition curdled into consequence. Meanwhile, my own world was evolving, cleaner, calmer, and entirely mine. I had taken a portion of my trust, about $400,000, and launched the Cole Integrity Foundation, an organization providing free legal aid and financial education for women navigating prenuptial and divorce cases. Within months, we'd helped a dozen women craft contracts that would save them from the same manipulation I'd faced. Every week, I sat with new clients, teachers, nurses, small business owners, who whispered the same question I once had. Is it wrong to protect myself? And every time, I told them the same thing my Aunt Ruthie had told me before she passed. Love without boundaries isn't romance, it's risk. One morning, Selah and I were sorting through intake files when she paused and looked up. "You know," she said, "you could turn this into national work. Conferences, workshops, maybe even policy consulting." I smiled. One step at a time. I'm just glad the first step mattered. She nodded. Dorian must be regretting that signature. Maybe, I said, sealing another envelope. But regret is only useful if it teaches you something. I doubt he's learned a thing. Truth proved me right. A month later, a mutual acquaintance forwarded me an article from a small business blog. Former sales manager files for bankruptcy after failed investment scheme. The photo beside the headline showed Dorian, thinner now, his charm eroded into weariness. He looked like a cautionary tale that had finally accepted its title. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Life had already written the final paragraph for him. That evening, I walked through the modest office of the foundation, pausing by the framed photo of my aunt that hung near the entrance. Her eyes, kind and unyielding, seemed to watch over everything. Thank you, I murmured softly, for the foresight, for the trust, and for the strength to see things clearly when love tried to blind me. Outside, the city glowed, a mix of grit and grace that mirrored my own story. The night air smelled like possibility, not fear. When I stepped onto the street, Sayla joined me, locking the door behind us. Dinner, she asked. Yeah, I said with a grin. Someplace loud. I've had enough silence for a lifetime. As we walked toward the restaurant lights, I glanced once over my shoulder at the skyline, thinking of everything that had been taken and everything I'd reclaimed. Dorian Pike had tried to rewrite my life into a cautionary tale. Instead, he became the footnote. And I, Marina Cole, finally became the headline of my own story. Marina's story isn't just about loss. It's about reclamation. She didn't walk away with half a fortune. She walked away with her freedom, her voice, and her dignity. The same paper her husband thought would secure his future became the document that saved hers. Too many women are taught that protecting themselves means they don't believe in love. But Marina proved that boundaries aren't barriers, they're blueprints for peace. So, if this story resonated with you, remember this truth. Love should never come with hidden fine print. Protect your dreams, your legacy, and your worth with the same care you give your heart. If you believe in stories where justice wins, share Marina's journey. Tell another woman that it's okay to set terms for her happiness. Follow for more powerful tales of resilience, revenge, and rebirth, where women don't just survive betrayal, they rewrite the ending.